I want to look at three things that exercise can greatly improve. And these are three things that as we age, and when I say age, I mean over the age of 40, 50, and beyond. These are three things that we can encounter, especially as women, that we need to address for overall fitness, health, longevity, and more importantly, health span and quality of life. Hi, my name is Carol Cavino, and I'm your host of the Forever Fit with Carol Cavino podcast. I'm a health coach for women over the age of 40 who are experiencing perimenopausal and menopausal hormonal symptoms. I help them to lose the body fat for good and to tone and strengthen their bodies. Before we get into those three factors, those three important factors, I just want to share with you a brief word about Beauty Counter. I recently have partnered with Beauty Counter, and it is because of the purity of their products. There are so many substances that have been banned in other countries, and even heavy metals that are showing up within our cosmetics and our skincare products. Now, this matters because when we are exposed to toxins, I mean, obviously, this is a toxic burden on our bodies and on our mitochondria, the powerhouses of our cells, but it can also affect the unborn child of a woman who is pregnant. It can cause weight gain by being stored within the fat cells. So essentially, whenever you are exposed to excessive amounts of toxin, your body wants to protect you. And in order to protect you, it scoops up those toxins and stores them in fat cells. And this can become quite a loop because you try to lose the weight and the toxins are released into the bloodstream. Our brain, our body does not like that, scoops them up again. It can make weight loss resistance very high and weight maintenance very difficult. So Beauty Counter has some wonderful products. I've been using them myself. You can go to my link, which is beautycounter.com/ Carol Cavino. That's beautycounter.com/ Carol Cavino. This will be in the show notes. Let's go ahead and get into today's episode. So the three things, we're going to go through them one by one. I'm going to talk about the role of exercise, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about lower body training and how important it is. So first of all, number one is going to be sarcopenia, and that is simply age-related muscle loss. But they're starting to see this sooner and sooner in individuals that are young, but they're simply not moving their bodies and not doing the resistance training that they need to build strength and muscle. And we, of course, saw this accelerate over the last, 2.5 years with being cooped up indoors for a long time. Gyms shut down. This did not help matters as far as sarcopenia goes. But as we age, this accelerates. And once we as women go through menopause, this accelerates even more. So there's a few factors here. We lose the protection of estrogen. We have fluctuations in estrogen leading into menopause. Some months it might be high, some months low. So there's a lack of balance from month to month. We lose testosterone almost entirely, which allows us to build muscle and retain muscle. It becomes increasingly difficult to put on muscle, but this is the thing, it becomes increasingly easy to lose muscle. So we can't put it on, we lose it quicker, we can't hold on to what we have. This means that if we do not take proactive measures, this situation will increase. And some people refer to sarcopenia as the kiss of death. And we'll go into that a little bit deeper. It has to do with insulin resistance in the muscles. Next up, number two is obesity, which is increasing at alarming rates, not just in women who are perimenopausal, menopausal, and post, but in general within our society and even within children and teens. These rates are alarming. When you combine that with muscle loss, once again, you are placing yourself in what I believe to be a dangerous situation for your health and your body. And then finally, there's osteoporosis, which is bone loss, and it tends to be not covered in the way it should be. And this is why, first of all, it's not a sexy topic to talk about bone loss. Second of all, they associate it with only older people. So somebody in their 40s tends to think it's way on down the line and they don't need to worry about it. Well, I have heard different stories from doctors that I follow. I listen to their podcasts, read their books, that this is something we should all be concerned of. Some individuals will develop osteoporosis quite young. I heard of one male doctor who was 30 years old and developed a severe case of osteoporosis. So having that DEXA scan, being aware of your bone density really should start sooner rather than later. Now, of course, as we go through perimenopause and into menopause, once again, we lose that protection of estrogen, which protects our bone density. You combine that with a loss of strength because we are losing muscle mass through sarcopenia, and perhaps struggling with a weight problem, obesity, or morbid obesity even. This is going to cause this problem to potentially get even worse. Now, some individuals, quite a few, I forget the exact numbers. I believe it could be as high as 20%, but I need to check out those numbers for sure. That was one stat that I recently heard from a doctor, a naturopathic doctor. And it's the combination of all three. So 20% can have all three of these: sarcopenia, obesity, osteoporosis. And of course, each individual category has high percentages as well. So this is what we're going to cover. So first of all, there's a myth of not being able to strength train because of joint replacement. So I want to start there, and we're going to tie in the three things that we need to watch out for as we move through the decades, and maybe even sooner. When I was personal training, I've not worked with people in person for quite some time, but when I was personal training, I worked with a lot of individuals who had had joint replacements. I had a female client who had had both hips replaced. I had a male client who had had both knees replaced. I had a woman with a shoulder replacement. I had another that this isn't a joint replacement, but who had back surgery. This is not uncommon when you're working with a 50 and especially a 60 plus population. When I was personal training a few years back, the majority of my clients were actually above 58, with many of them above 60 and a few above 70. So I saw quite a bit of this. And there was a fear, and sometimes the fear had even come from their doctors who were telling them not to strength train because it was going to shorten the life of the joint replacements. Now, this can be true with certain exercise. Deep squats and running is not suggested when you have hip replacements. Yes, you can do those things. It's not that you can't do them, but it is probably going to shorten the life of your hip replacement. And considering how difficult that surgery is, my husband went through it and had a hip replaced a few years back. I believe it was 4 years ago. It's a difficult surgery. It's a long recovery, even when you're in shape, and he was in very good shape. So, of course, you don't want to do things that are going to shorten the life of your joint replacement. That makes perfect sense. So, just know if you run with a hip replacement that there might be consequences on down the line and you need the surgery again. Deep squats can be another one. But with that being said, the client that I had who had had double hip replacements did squat, and she did lunge, and she did do a leg press, but she did so in more of a shallow partial range of motion. So we often hear to get the benefit of the exercise, it must be the full range of motion. And in some circumstances, yes, that's true. And in a perfect world, yes, that can be true as well. But as we age and we get injuries, we get joint replacements, we get arthritis, this is not always possible. I cannot do a full range squat and I cannot do a full range leg press. And it is because of my lower lumbar issues. My back simply will not tolerate it. It flares it up every single time. So I do a 3-quarter range. My client with the hip replacement did a half range. And what I told her to do was to squeeze the muscles. If we were working the glutes, she was squeezing the glutes. If we were working the quad, she was engaging her quads. And I really got her to make that mind connection with her muscles and engage them as much as possible and keep them under stimulation. We did a lot of double pulses in, say, sumo squats. So there are safe ways to do this movement. Now, with shoulder injuries, those are really quite common. The last thing you want to do, in my experience, now this is my experience, I'm not quoting a doctor, this is just what I saw. The last thing you want to do is stop moving that shoulder. It tends to freeze up, it tends to lock up, it tends to get extremely painful to bring the arm over your head. It was not uncommon for people to come to me for training who were in their 50s and 60s who could not get one arm or both arms above their head, could not do it. And the first thing we worked on was increasing that range of motion. And what had typically happened is there had been some type of injury and they stopped moving the joint. They just stopped. And pretty soon they lost that functionality. So it is best to keep blood flow, in my experience, in the joints, in the muscles, in the ligaments, and also to consider your fascia, which runs from your neck all the way down to your ankles. And when fascia gets tight, which will often happen after an injury, happened with my back injury, it starts to affect your gait, your range of motion. You want to go to a professional that knows how to lengthen and release some of that tension in the fascia. So it is a complete myth that you cannot train because of a joint replacement. You will have to make modifications. You might have to change a few exercises, but you should still be able to do strength training and most strength training exercises. Next up, let's look at functional training. Now, functional training has got a funky reputation. I absolutely despised it. So when I first became a personal trainer, went through all my training, this was all the talk. You have to teach your clients functional movements, and it ranged. It was all kinds of things, from standing one-legged on a Bosu ball to, I'm trying to think of another example, maybe squatting on the upside down Bosu ball that's wobbling on you. A lot of that kind of stuff, things with a fit ball, things where it was a little bit shaky. And yes, working on balance is important, working on stability is important. But functional training to me means training all of the muscle groups because they all work together, all of the joints and the ligaments. You want to train joints, ligaments, muscles. So training just legs, it used to bother me if somebody would ask me just to train legs. I'm not worried about my upper body. I only want my legs. I just don't train people that way. I train the whole body. When I train the shoulders, I don't train just the frontal deltoid or the side deltoid. I train all three heads, front, side, back of the shoulders. Biceps, I train short and long head. Triceps, short and long head. Legs, I'm looking at quadriceps. I'm looking at hamstrings. And then all the way up into the glutes, of course, which is part of your core. You don't want to partially train because these things work in conjunction. Another way that I looked at functional training was to do exercises that were the opposite of what their daily life put them under. So, for example, I had a lot of Sandia Lab people when I worked in personal training years ago. And as they aged, they often had trouble with the cervical spine, their neck, from looking over a computer or bending over a desk and having their head down all day. And it was just about irreversible because it was such a curvature. So what I would do is I would work on all of the things that did the opposite. So rather than being forward, I exercised, or excuse me, I used exercises for the posterior side. So maybe more for the back of the shoulders, the trapezius, the lats, lots of seated rows. Seated rows, beautiful functional exercise as far as I'm concerned. So I have a very different way of looking at functional exercise. It's not fancy, and it's not standing with one leg on a Bosu ball. It's addressing each and every muscle group. We talked about sarcopenia and the dangers. I mean, obviously, if we are weak going into our 60s and beyond, we are more at risk for falls and we are more likely to get injured during falls. Now, I had clients, I had one in particular, she was 65 and she did fall. She tripped on a step. Stuff happens. Wasn't because she was weak, she just didn't see it with rushing, tripped over it, and was able to catch herself. She got a little bit bruised up, skinned up, but she was able to catch herself, and the injuries were minimal. You know, there were no broken bones, there were no broken wrists because her joints, her ligaments, everything was strong. Her bones were strong. Going into old age with sarcopenia also means that we're going to have more adipose fat tissue. Because if we have less lean quality muscle mass, we have more adipose fat tissue. And we don't want muscle that is marbled with that adipose tissue. A problem that I sometimes see when people do a body scan for body fat, let's say they go to their doctor's office or their local gym, and it's a scan where you hold on to these handles, you take off your shoes, clean off your feet, and stand on. It's a very expensive machine. And I actually love it. I use it quite frequently at my nurse practitioner's office. But the danger I see is somebody is obese and goes in there and does that test, and they're getting back a report that they've got all this muscle, but it is not quality muscle. It is marbled with this body fat, this adipose tissue. So you don't just look at the muscle and having it, because you can be obese and have the muscle, but you also look at the quality of that muscle. So that's an increased risk of body fat and obesity. If we have less muscle, you see how these play into each other. Talk about the insulin resistance piece in a moment. So grip strength is another thing that we need to look at. They have done several tests on grip strength. You know, your just ability to hold on. Let's say you're doing a dead hang. I do those just to do them because I want to work my grip strength. And I play a little game and I time myself how long I can do it. I'll get on the assisted pull-up machine so that I feel a little bit more comfortable. So if my grip starts to give up, I can kind of just step down on that bar and raise back up. But I really aim for as long as I can go, or at least to be there for a minute, holding on and training that grip strength. Of course, all of your weight training is also going to train that grip strength. You're using it constantly to grip the weights. And especially with your back exercises, you're highly engaging your grip. So you want to train that. And the reason being, it's linked with longevity and a decrease in all-cause mortality. I'll say it again, grip strength is a good indicator for longevity, and it's a good indicator of mortality. So something to think about with your training, that you might want to include more grip type exercises. Next up, we have high intensity resistance training. That's different from high intensity interval training. Some people call this HIRT, HIRT, and I've heard this term used various ways. I've heard it used with cardio, I've heard it used with resistance training. But here we're referring specifically to resistance training. What you're doing is you're bringing enough intensity. You don't want to do a set and get on your phone and just sit there. Now, if you see me at the gym, you will sometimes see me pick up my phone. And usually I'm resting between a long circuit. So I might have a minute. I might answer my daughter real quick, or I might change the podcast. My podcast ran out and I try to find another one. But I am not there on my phone, emailing, texting, on and on and on for 30 minutes. I see people do a set and literally just sit on that machine and play on that phone for 30 minutes. I've seen it between sets. Ridiculous. It's rude because other people need to use the equipment. It's thoughtless. And it's doing your body absolutely no good. You're kind of undoing what you just did with your set because you're not bringing enough intensity. And if you look at the bodies of those people, and I do not mean this in a critical or judgmental way, but it's true, it's the truth. I observe it, they don't change. They do not change their body composition because they don't ever bring that intensity. Or they're talking between each and every set. They're moving all around the gym. And if you like to visit and socialize, no judgment here. I get it. And a lot of people, especially after the last 2.5 years, we're just hungry for the conversation. And I'm not unfriendly at the gym, but oftentimes I maybe have an hour and a half. That's all I have. And I have it all planned out. And if I stop for a 15, 20-minute conversation with somebody, that just shot my cardio, or that just took away several sets of an exercise I really need to focus on. And so for that reason, I have my headset on. I might wave, say hi, but I am there to do a job. I don't have time to chat. Maybe a little bit on the weekend, but on the weekdays, I have appointments, I have Zooms, I have podcasts to record. I can't do it. I just can't do it. So there's that. But then there's not changing your body when you're not bringing the intensity. Now, with that said, intensity is very individual. I can't tell you how much weight to lift. I can't tell you how many reps and sets. I can't tell you how hard to push because I don't know your individual circumstances. I work with clients that have struggled with mold poisoning, mercury poisoning. I've worked with clients who've struggled with adrenal dysfunction, HPA axis dysfunction, cortisol regulation issues. And I have to handle each and every one of these situations differently when it comes to intensity. I have to really talk to these ladies about listening to their body and knowing when to push and what days that maybe you need to pull back a little bit because you didn't get any sleep and your cortisol levels are out of control, glucose levels are high. You just kind of need to bring those stress levels down. But with that said, most of the time, what I see is people just go too easy on themselves. They're not hard enough on themselves. And women do this quite a bit. I'm sorry, ladies, no judgment, but it is true. I trained a lot of individuals over the course of this past 11 years and have seen it with my own eyes. So don't be afraid to bump up intensity. Intensity might be a heavier weight, but if you have injuries, joint issues, joint replacements, you might have to work with time under tension, which is a little bit different. It's going longer, keeping the muscle under tension, and less weight. The last thing I want to cover before I go into insulin resistance in the muscle is breaking the mindset that strength training is for young people. We just got to get away from that. And I saw this too when people came to me. They thought they couldn't get intense. They thought they couldn't get put on muscle. They thought certain parts of the weight room weren't for them because they were older or they were women. They would be afraid to go into the areas with the barbells or the dumbbells or the plate loaded machines. They were intimidated. Or they just believed maybe their doctor had told them they needed to take it easy because they're starting to have some bone loss or things like that. No, that is just not the case. That mindset is not right. Strength training is for everybody, and in fact, you need it more as you age, not less, more. So now that we've talked about a few myths, debunked them, we've talked about the importance of this, let's look at insulin resistance, which can lead to type 2 diabetes, and of course plays into obesity, and obesity plays into insulin resistance. They go both ways. The first place that we become insulin resistant is within our muscles. New research coming out of Europe is showing that it starts in the legs. Starts in the legs. There's also some research emerging that women in particular in their 60s and on up benefit greatly from having a strength training program that really addresses the lower body. So I'll say that again. My son was actually texting me. It totally distracted me. I'm just going to be honest with you right up here. He's in the Philippines right now. He is in the Navy, and it's okay for me to disclose this location because it's public, but he has been out at sea, and they have a little bit of a weekend where they are in port, and so he's able to text. But back to the insulin resistance in the muscle. Starts in the muscles and starts, they believe, this is what research is showing, not conclusive, that it begins in the lower body, and research is reiterating this fact by women 60, 65, 70 plus can greatly improve not just their strength, but actually their insulin sensitivity. So they're more insulin sensitive, which is what we want, and releasing less insulin. That's what we want. Lower overall blood glucose levels, stable. We don't want up and down and up and down, and less release of insulin. So this improves when they improve lower body strength, and they also improve their strength, meaning that if they do fall, they do trip, they're much more likely to catch themselves. Now, think about strength training your legs. An important aspect of this is deceleration. I talked about this in an earlier podcast where you're going downstairs. That is typically where the injuries happen. They typically don't happen going up. I mean, I'm sure they do, but most of them are occurring going down, especially for people who are older. And what it has to do with is deceleration. The legs don't have those quadricep muscles, the development of the quadriceps to be able to hit the brakes. Something very important. When I used to run downhill, I would see this. I ran down a very steep hill of the academy, and it at one point, because I would start up at the highest point in Albuquerque, which is Tramway, it would feel like my legs were just going on their own. It was just like little wheels turning, a hamster on a little wheel or on a treadmill. And I had to use my quadricep muscles in the front, what we think of as our thighs, to slow myself down and have control, because you don't want that out of control downward motion. And so that's another reason to have that leg strength. So I'm going to go ahead and sum up. Just remember the three things that you want to watch out for are sarcopenia, obesity, osteoporosis. There's large percentages in each of these categories. I don't have the numbers available right in front of me. Just trust me, those numbers are big. And the numbers are growing of individuals who develop all three. Remember that there are myths about strength training, that you can't do it when you're older and you can't do it with joint replacement. This simply is not true. You might have to change things, you might have to modify things, but you can still be in the gym doing the thing. Functional training is important, but not in the way you think. It's not a bunch of fancy, silly exercises that are up on a YouTube channel. It's developing all of the joints. So in particular, compound exercises are good because compound exercises work multiple joints and multiple muscle groups. This is good for your strength, your joints, and your ligaments. Sarcopenia is dangerous and can be the kiss of death. We don't want that to happen at any age, but especially once past the age of 50, and we are prone to it as women. High intensity resistance training, HIRT, HIRT. Make sure that some of your sessions have that intensity. It's okay to have a session where you go a little bit less. I do that because I work out frequently. So I can't work out at a super high intensity each and every day. I will get injured. So I have days that are more intense, typically a leg or a back day, and days that are less intense, like biceps, triceps, and shoulders. We talked about the importance of resistance training for all three of these things: sarcopenia, loss of muscle; obesity, excess body fat; osteoporosis, bone loss. So for bone loss, it is going to help you to do resistance training. And just a quick caveat here, there is some research coming out on rucking. Rucking is where you wear a specific type of pack. It's positioned on your body in such a way that it's not straining the lower back or the shoulders. So you're able to position that in it's pretty safe. And you put weight in there. You decide how much weight. You buy your weights and put them into the pack. You can do 10, you can do 20, you can do on up. And you hike, you walk. You could take it to the gym and walk on the treadmill. You could hike with it. You could walk the dog. The idea is you're getting more of a heel strike because you're carrying that weight. And of course, you are getting that cardio component that's important, and you're strengthening your lower body. And research has shown an improvement in bone density in women when they incorporate rucking. So just a little side note there that I didn't mention. Grip strength, very important. It is a predictor of mortality, all-cause mortality, and it is the predictor of um, longevity as far as length of life. So, length of life and quality of life. We want to break the mindset that strength training is for the younger. Like I said, I reiterate that again because I see that more than anything. And like I said, we need strength training more than ever as we age. So let's get going on some of these goals. I would love to hear from you. If you incorporate rucking, if you incorporate some resistance training, let me know. Shoot me a message on Instagram. It's at Carol Covino Fitness. That's at Carol Covino Fitness. There are also some links for some free resources. I have an energy guide or cheat sheet, and I also have a workout guide that is periodization. So certain weeks are more intense, certain weeks you back off. Very good for training the female body, very good for a woman's body, particularly if you are still cycling. I have the link up to Beauty Counter. Definitely check that out. And I'm starting to build up my YouTube channel. You can also check out that link, that link as well. So thank you so much. And until next time, get to doing all that wonderful strength training. Do hire a trainer. If you've never strength trained, please do at least for a few sessions and let me know how it goes. Bye for now.